So today, we're going to talk about the 2019 Washington Nationals, which once again is hard for me as a Braves fan to talk about, considering my team won the division that season. But the 2019 World Series Championship Washington Nationals season began in a way that would lead you not to think that they were going to be the 2019 World Series champions. They began the season with a terrible sort of losing record, and the story was really what the season was going to look like without Bryce Harper, who seemed like he had moved off to greener pastures in Philadelphia, even after he spoke these funny words where he accidentally said, "I can't wait to bring a championship back to Washington," in his opening interview with the Philadelphia Phillies. However, the story began a lot earlier than that. Some would say it began in 2005 when they refused to take a trade for Rafael Soriano and decided to build their team in a new and smarter way. Some would say it started when they were able to pull Jason Worth from the Phillies and sign him as a free agent, being the first major free agent signing that the Washingtons had been able to have. But I would say it really started in 2012 when they proved that they were an organization that puts their players and their players' safety and their players' health over their team's short-term success. In 2012, the Nationals were coming off their first ever National League East championship, and they decided not to use their best pitcher. Was the pitcher hurt? No. Did he do something wrong to offend anybody? Also no. They were sitting him because both they and his agent believed his and their long-term future would turn out better if they kept a hard innings cap on him. This meant sitting him down despite the team desperately needing him, as we would learn when they were upset in the 2012 NLDS in 5 games against the Cardinals. Here's the rub, though. 7 years later, the team was back in the playoffs again. By this time, this pitcher was a seasoned veteran at the end of his contract and thus was available to be pushed as hard as needed to win a World Series. He turned out to be a dominant pitcher in the playoffs, perhaps having one of the most dominant playoff performances by a pitcher of all time, and was named the World Series MVP, thus justifying that whole gambit back in 2012 in the first place. The road to the 2019 World Series and the future truly started with an organization that cared more about its players than wins, as they sat Stephen Strasburg all the way back then. You know, when I asked in the office about what sort of Bible story worked for this, almost everybody said immediately, you need to think about the way in which they had to wait. And so Sarah came to mind when I asked people. This story of Sarah in the book of Genesis. This is what we read. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I am worn out, my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah, you will have a son." You know, it's funny because just a year later, they did have a son, and she would name him Laughter. Isaac is what that is in Hebrew. About 7 years ago, 8 years ago now, a lot of people were laughing at the Nationals for the way in which they sat Stephen Strasburg, their best player. It appears that the Nationals have the last laugh now. Friends, sometimes God tells us to wait, and we don't want to. But sometimes that wait is worth it. And in the end, we are far happier than we ever would have been in the first place. If you're waiting right now, if you're waiting today, be in prayer. Continue to ask God for what you need now and for what you hope for in the future. And when all is said and done, I think you'll be pretty happy about the way that God has taken care of you. We'll get the last laugh too. Thanks for talking about baseball with me.